Rod D. Martin is here with a full breakdown next. Welcome back to Stacklebeck Tonight. As Europe grapples with mass Muslim migration, demographic decline, and a growing crisis of national identity, are the riots we just showed you from Paris over the weekend a sign of things to come? And what is the latest on the Iran war? Joining us now to break it down is Dr. Rod D. Martin, CEO of Martin Capital and founder of the Rod Martin Report. Rod, always great to see you, my friend. Hey, what we saw in Paris over the weekend, I think, after what we've seen over the past few decades, was entirely predictable. These are the consequences of cultural suicide. Can we expect more of this in Paris, the UK, and beyond throughout Europe, sadly, in the years to come?
Short of some significant electoral changes, this is their fate. I mean, they've chosen it. They've been very, very careful in doing everything they possibly can wrong. And that's been going on for over a decade now. A lot of this is post-colonial guilt. Most of these countries are former imperial powers, and they have just been absolutely overburdened by what has been termed suicidal empathy. Yeah. But the truth is, everyone deserves a homeland. These people deserve a homeland. So do the French people. So do the English people. There's nothing wrong with being English or French or German. It is perfectly acceptable for them to have their own homeland and restrict their own immigration. So I am hopeful to see Nigel Farage as prime minister and similarly minded people in control in France and in Germany, and actually get to the point where we can have some rational immigration policy. One of the things I would note very briefly is that Germany is taking some positive steps in this direction. They now have plans to remove 9 million Syrian so-called refugees who came in a decade ago, now that Syria is somewhat sorted and the civil war has ended. That's a huge step in the right direction. The real question is why they took them in the first place, because the overwhelming majority, more than 70% of these so-called refugees were military-aged males who did not bother to bring their families, made no attempt whatsoever to bring wives or children or mothers or fathers. And that should have told Germany and the other countries everything they needed to know. Sweden is getting a little handle on this. Germany's starting to get a handle on this. I think there's hope for Europe, but it's going to be hard between here and there.
Yes, some very difficult decisions to be made. And by the way, it was Angela Merkel who opened the floodgates to those millions of Muslim refugees that you mentioned. It seems to me, Rod, that the United States, and I've said it a bunch here on the show, is very much a firewall for Western civilization right now. That includes, of course, tackling the Iranian regime and that problem. Iran still is not giving President Trump what he wants. And at the end of the day, that includes, first and foremost, an end to the nuclear program, opening up the Strait of Hormuz. What's your take on what we're seeing unfold right now? It's a slow process, of course. The Iranians will talk you to death if you let them. But do you think a deal will get done, or is this going back to military action?
I think the president is waiting them out. I think the people on our side who are dumb enough to say things, and some of these people are pretty serious national security professionals, going on about how, Iran has won this conflict. In what possible sense is that true? Because they haven't immediately bowed down to Donald Trump on the day that the prognosticators said they ought to. I mean, that's just silly. I mean, we actually dropped atomic bombs on Japan, and it took weeks for them to get around to surrendering. We certainly haven't done that in Iran. So, this is, in my view, stalling to some degree on both sides. The Iranians believe they can wait out the Americans because past administrations have been capable of being waited out. We saw that with Lyndon Johnson. We saw that with Bush and Obama. We saw that with Joe Biden. So they figure, hey, might work for us. The other side of that coin, though, is that Donald Trump is also incentivized to stall because every single day the blockade continues, Iran loses $400 to $500 million a day in revenue that it absolutely has to have. Iran has 10 times the population of Israel, but only half of Israel's economy. This is not a big economy. It could be a first world country if it were free, but as it is, it's deeply impoverished. Their banking system has collapsed. Their currency has collapsed. They are in deep, deep trouble and they can't get income. And every day that passes, that situation gets worse. So the aim here, in my view, from the administration's perspective, is to keep turning up that pressure until they either do make a deal out of desperation, which I don't believe they're going to do, or the regime actually collapses, probably because the people, having been trained and armed, as seems almost certain to be going on right now, find themselves in a position to overthrow the IRGC.
Yeah, so we are playing the long game, which is interesting, Rod, because Iran is infamous for its patience and dragging things out. Now it's kind of the tables being turned, so to speak. The Iranian regime, as you laid out, Rod, clearly weakened severely over the past few months, but so have their allies. Russia and China have been weakened as well. You've talked about Russia right now in the middle of what you've called a slow strangulation. Tell us what's happening with Putin's regime right now.
It's all part of the same thing. You have these oil powers that have been arrayed against us to one degree or another since not long after I was born. OPEC was the big baddie in the 70s. They shut down our oil supplies twice in that decade, just held the entire global economy hostage, much to the benefit of the Soviet Union, because Russia was always the world's biggest producer. Well, Russia isn't the world's biggest producer anymore. America outproduces Russia and Saudi Arabia put together. We're the largest exporter on earth of refined product. We're the third largest exporter of crude, and that's growing fast. So that puts everything in a different light. And for Donald Trump to keep the strait closed actually shifts long-term supply contracts in a very meaningful way from the Middle East to Texas and Louisiana. And everybody on the various cable channels seems to be missing this. I can't fathom why. Russia's in very much the same boat. You saw today the French Navy intercepted a Shadow Fleet tanker intended to send oil from Russia, presumably to China, because they're just about the only customer left. That is all illicit oil. That's oil that's under sanctions. It's illegal to buy it. And if you do buy it, you're getting it at a steep discount. That has been a huge prop to the Chinese economy for several years now. That has largely gone away because, again, we're blockading Iran, we flipped Venezuela, and we're intercepting the Shadow Fleet tankers that carry Russian oil. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are blowing up their refineries and their pumping stations and everything else they can get to far, far past Moscow, deep into Russia now. And the Russian oil industry is really in trouble. So these things being true, the president has a real opportunity once he has sorted the Iran situation, I think, to get us to a durable peace between Russia and Ukraine. And that's going to really put China on its back foot.
Yeah, folks, this is why Rod D. Martin is a must-follow on X. Go ahead on X right now and follow him there and subscribe, of course, to the Rod Martin Report. More with Dr. Rod D. Martin. After the break, we're bringing it closer to home. What's the status of the SAVE Act, redistricting, the 2026 midterms? More with Rod Martin after the break. Stick around. Welcome back to Stackleback Tonight. For decades, political power in America has been shaped by redistricting battles, census counts, and fierce fights over who gets represented in D.C. Now, a series of major court rulings and election reforms could dramatically alter that landscape in 2026, 2028, and beyond. And some are calling it the biggest political shakeup in a generation. We're back with Dr. Rod D. Martin. He's CEO of Martin Capital and creator of the Rod Martin Report. Rod, gerrymandering, it's a word we're hearing a lot. People at home might say, gerrymandering? Jerry, what? What exactly is that? Break down what that is, what the Democrats are doing on that front, particularly when it comes to race, and why the Supreme Court ruling recently was so important.
Gerrymandering is as old as the world, and the Supreme Court says that it's fine if the Democrats get control of a state legislature and their constitution says that they can draw the districts in their state however they want, then they can. If they have some other system that they've created in their constitution, like Virginia has, then they can't. And the recent Democrat redistricting in Virginia, which would have eliminated all but one Republican seat, was struck down by the Virginia Supreme Court on Virginia constitutional grounds. But when you're talking about U.S. House seats, for the most part, you're talking about an apportionment by the census every 10 years. We have the census in 2020, we have the census in 2030. That decides how many people live in each state. And based on that, you divide up 435 House districts and 435 electoral votes and divvy them up among the states. Okay, so here's what the Democrats have done. For years, they have taken a twisted view, and their Democrat judges have gone with them on this, of the Voting Rights Act. They have said, we want to help Black people have representation in Congress, therefore we're going to have these racially gerrymandered districts where our only consideration really is race, just skin color. If you're Black, we're going to cram you into this district like a ghetto, and you're going to for sure elect a Black representative. Well, that isn't even true. One of those racially gerrymandered districts is in Memphis, and it's consistently elected a Jewish white guy named Steve Cohen. So that's not even accomplishing what they purport it does. What it actually does is it spots the Democrats 21 U.S. House seats every 2 years that they don't have to compete in. So the Supreme Court just came back and said, look, if you're determining anything based on race, that's just wrong. It violates the Voting Rights Act, violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but above all, it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which has been with us since right after the Civil War. You just can't do it. Well, that puts, again, probably 20, maybe 30 seats in play that wouldn't have been. The Democrats are going to win some of those anyway. That's fine. But Republican pickups will probably number at least 12 to 18 just on that. In addition, we're having these redistricting fights in places like Texas and Florida because the truth is the Republicans haven't gerrymandered on the legitimate political terms that are allowed all that much, whereas nearly every Democrat state has gerry-maxed in their own favor. So there's just not a lot of room to get more seats out of the 6 states in New England where 40% of the vote goes to the Republicans and they have 0 House seats. The Democrats have already gerrymandered that to the max. So what Florida and Texas have done and some other states is simply try to re-even the playing field. Yeah. Then you've got the census coming up. The census is going to find that millions of Americans have moved from blue states to red states. We already are seeing that. You know, Babylon Bee laughs that U-Haul has installed a bullet train from California to Texas. This is happening, yeah. But also with mass deportations. The blue states are losing people who were wrongly counted in the last census as citizens, and those states got extra representatives because of that corruption. That has to end, and the Trump administration is committed to it.
Rod, great breakdown, my friend. And look, it seems that the 2030 census is going to benefit Republicans, certainly. And secondly, the SAVE Act, in the shorter term, God willing, the SAVE Act, Rod, what is the status in the Republican-controlled Senate of the SAVE Act, which would demand people show voter ID? Imagine that.
Well, John Thune has held this up in the Senate, and I think for what are probably good reasons from his own point of view. He's very concerned about doing anything that might monkey around with the filibuster rules because he figures that the Democrats will do it back to us 1,000-fold if they ever and when they ever regain the Senate. The problem is they're going to do that anyway. I mean, we're past the Rubicon here. Yeah. Everybody's going to do everything they can. So Thune needs to get with the program. Now, Speaker Johnson just did something phenomenal, in my view. He's attaching the Save America Act, which requires things like voter ID, just basic things. You have to show ID to buy cough syrup. You have to show ID if you get pulled over on the highway. You have to show ID to buy a drink at a bar, for heaven's sake. But the most important thing we do, voting, oh, just anybody can come. That's crazy. And so the Save America Act is essential to preventing fraud in the same way that it's essential for you to be able to prove who you are when you open a checking account at your bank. We can't allow fraud. That has to happen through the SAVE Act. That is the most important thing on the legislative agenda. Johnson attaching it to a reconciliation bill means that in theory, it can pass the Senate with 51 votes. What will happen? Well, the Senate parliamentarian was appointed by the Democrat senator from Nevada, Harry Reid, when he was majority leader. She's going to rule it out of order. There's no question about that. So it lands squarely back in John Thune's lap. He's going to have to decide if he's going to arm twist her or if he's going to replace her, which is completely within his power. But it is utterly absurd that we are letting parliamentary rulings be dictated by a Democrat activist employee instead of by the elected leaders of the United States Senate.
Yeah, Rod, about 30 seconds left. If it passes the SAVE Act, is that a complete game changer? What kind of ramifications would that have? Positive ramifications. About 30 seconds left.
It is a huge game changer. Nothing's a cure-all. I mean, there will always be fraud. There's always been fraud. But this would clean up a tremendous amount of it, particularly with regard to ID, mail-in ballots, things of that nature that have been heavily abused. It needs to happen.
Great breakdown, Rod. As always, folks, Rod D. Martin. Be sure to follow him on X, across social media, and the Rod Martin Report as well. Rod, great breakdown, my friend. Keep up the great work. God bless. We will see you again soon. And coming up next, my final thoughts on the situation at home, abroad, and how we can pray, how we can live in these tumultuous times. That's coming up. Don't move.